Today's Old Testament passage is from Isaiah 58, and it was, it's verses 3 through 11. It was, if anything, the hallmark passage of the General Assembly. It's the chapter in which Isaiah admonishes the overly pious, and I'm struck with how thoroughly, 800 years before Christ, Isaiah anticipates Matthew 25. The first voice you hear is, of course, the voice of the pious. Listen for the word of God after the voice of the pious. Why do we fast, and you do not see? Why humble ourselves, and you do not notice? And Isaiah's riposte, look, you only fast to quarrel and to fight. I got louder. You only fast to quarrel. You serve your interest on your fast day. You oppress all your workers. Look, you fast to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble myself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? This is the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? And when you see the naked, to cover them and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and the Lord will say, here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places, and to make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters never fail. So hope is a muscle. I drew number 5. Actually, I wanted another one first, but Mary Lou talked me out of it. Right? And I'm very happy that I got this one, because it allows me to get very personal, for one thing. And that's the premise or the idea we have that the church exists for the world and not for itself. Its buildings and programs must be used for the actual life, service, and witness to the world of God's grace and love. What could the session have been thinking about those 30 or so years ago? It was at least 7 years before I got here, so I'm not at all responsible. But I can confess its effect on me. Most of you know that before I began coming here, I was basically on church from the age of about 15 to 50. I went to many churches, but mostly to gawk at old stuff, gargoyles and shrouds, very old people in agony and remorse, on their knees and weeping, inching in humiliation towards the icon of La Señora de la Misericordia. I had a morbid interest in relics, maybe like a little bit of bone, which could have been from a saint dead 1,000 years ago, or could have been from a pork chop that had been left out in the sun for a while. Closer to home here in America, in my wilderness years, I went into churches only to see someone married or buried. Churches were places where folks got together to conspire to ignore the incredibly foolish act of marriage or the correspondingly futile gesture of pretending that death ain't death. In other words, for 35 years, I succeeded at being an aesthete, an agnostic, and a cynic. Churches were interesting and often very beautiful places, but they were places, and I treated them as such, structures, cultural and architectural. And yet the welcome here made me stay. It made me feel I was returned and at home. This room is light and airy, but is it churchy? Hardly. Right? There are no pews, no stained glass, and thank you very much, no massive organ to bellow and bluster with lugubrious solemnity. It's always a good day as a writer when you can write lugubrious solemnity and really mean it, Instead, we have folding chairs, and we put them away, or somebody puts them away for us. Martha Stewart would call this a multi-purpose room. And it's a room where I've seen Isaac and Micah, Theo, Elliot, Felix, Milo, Rachel, and many before them slide shouting from side to side in their stocking feet. I've also seen my dog Annie running in circles in this room and yelping with excitement, but I think I probably should have left out that detail. As for stained glass, personally, if it's not Marc Chagall, it might as well be colored cellophane. And our music, it's amazing, right? I sing so well when I lip sync standing next to Bryce. I came back. I got rechurched. And thoroughly enough that 2 decades later, I volunteered to be a commissioner at the General Assembly. In the intervening years, people have asked me what I was hoping for. What hope motivated me to return to the church? And usually I thought, what a silly hope, right? For years I shrugged, for I didn't have a good answer. You see, I imagined hope was something that you had and spent. Indeed, in the last few weeks between General Assembly and rereading Martin Buber, I have come to realize that I was taking hope as if it were an it, something one had or didn't have, might hoard or might spend. But I heard something in Kentucky that stays with me. Hope is a muscle, part of the being with which God endowed us. It's also a muscle in the sense that you use it or lose it. So let's get to the weight room, and it might as well be here. The church, in other words, is elsewhere and always, and one of the places I have seen it most recently is Louisville, Kentucky. Let me give you a bit about the General Assembly, fill you in. You know that 2 years ago it was online. This year we heard more than a few resigned congratulations that it had gone as well as it did, the online one. But pandemic, etc. This year was hybrid, as we say, with several plenaries, online plenaries in mid-June, and then various committees cycling through Louisville in 4 clusters of 3 and 4 committees. And then there were 5 days of online plenaries, days averaging about 11 hours, one as long as 13, and the shortest a mere 9 hours. We weren't really done until the 9th, a week ago Saturday. In the course of those 3.5 weeks, I put in at least 100 hours, and that doesn't include preparation beforehand or travel time. And that's a heck of a lot for a 72-year-old spine. I still need a chiropractor if anybody has a recommendation. For a newbie like me, some of the actions of the General Assembly were mystifying. Honestly, there were times when I felt guilty that I had so little understanding of what was going on, what was really at stake. Worse yet, I tried to care, but could not, for example, as the per capita budget amount went from $8.98 to $9.85, thinking that's merely 2 gallons of gasoline. Mystifying was also a bit boring. There were times when I was thinking, I wonder if Martha needs some help with those dishes in the kitchen, right? But if you insist, I'll try to figure out what difference it makes that we have unified the budgets of the OGA, the PMA, and the ASG. And what long-term, OMG, LOL, difference that will make to the PCUSA, though IMHO, time could be better spent at the moment. Okay, sorry. That joke doesn't make it to the final version. Right? At the moment, however, I simply thought these finance folks seem competent and full of goodwill, just like the finance team here at Trinity. So what can possibly go wrong? So, either vote yes or just don't vote. And there were some discussions about standing rules that seemed perfectly reasonable in their drafts, at least to me they did, and that could have been affirmed in 10 minutes, but underwent amendments to the amendment and perfections to the amendments prior to which substitute motions failed, and we returned to the unamended original motion, which passed. Where's lunch? Right? It needs emphasis that the people who serve as parliamentarians, I'm looking at you, Bronwyn, right, to the General Assembly and its committees are astonishing in their devotion, their attention to detail, their calm, their patience, and their proficiency in discriminating between matters of judgment and adherence to good rules of order. Not incidentally, right, our General Presbyter is a parliamentarian, and I do hope she's listening, and thank you, Bronwyn. Now, some of the decisions, the ones I woke up for, were momentous, and they are courageous, and they're important, and I need to share them. Brace yourselves. The General Assembly, while with full throat asserting Israel's right to nationhood, asserted the same right for Palestinian Muslims and Christians, demonstrating that the government of Israel, in its actions, creates an apartheid state. The vote of 266 to 116 was the closest vote of the convention. I heard my dad yelling at me from the hereafter as I voted on that one. The General Assembly called for the complete divestment from 5 fossil fuel companies, 5 that have sort of like given their chance and decided not to take it. Chevron, ExxonMobil, Marathon, Phillips 66, and Valero. Right? Valero? That's all I can think about. Is that. Right. These are companies which have been utterly uncooperative, even in setting distant goals. At the Assembly, the YADs, Young Adult Advisory Delegates, cheered. Today and tomorrow in Great Britain, the temperature record will be set at 104 Fahrenheit. Your national church has renewed its commitment to end gun violence. I think we have some saints among us and recently departed that we think of in this respect. By initiating a 10-year campaign, they did this while many of us, in fact probably all of us, were still coping with the brutality of Buffalo and Uvalde. And in Louisville, again, we were speaking of the name of Breonna Taylor. Your church resolved not to let this issue rest. Do I hear an amen? The General Assembly overwhelmingly voted in favor of affirming immigrant rights and declaring itself a sanctuary and accompaniment church. No kidding. All of this is so close to home. There are people in our midst creating models in the spirit of Matthew 25 or Isaiah 58 for the environment, for gun control, for the care of the unhoused in a redundant Presbyterian office, for refugees from the collapse of Kabul, and for a mother who carried her infant across the Sonoran Desert. I think the national church might be catching up with y'all. This was not a timid General Assembly. Indeed, in his Juneteenth sermon, the stated clerk, J. Herbert Nelson, too, told that the power of faith right now in the Presbyterian Church USC is to recalibrate who we are, to come to terms with what it really means to be grounded in faith. And he called on us to be motivated, to imagine, to innovate. He admitted, that's a challenge for a denomination with a lot of rules. And what's more, that's a challenge for decently and in order, because we are living in a time of disorder. He exhorted pastors to understand that they can't pump folks up on Sunday and then send people back to hell on Monday. For the poor, the hungry, the prisoners, the addicts, the outcast, and the lonely wanderers, our faith and our privilege move us to be, as he said, repairers of the breach and transformers of the present reality. This was also a remarkably agile General Assembly. On the day the Supreme Court issued its revocation of Roe v. Wade, the Health, Safety, and Benefits Committee pulled together a clarion resolution asserting that women are full moral agents whose relation to state, God, and their consciences is not altered by pregnancy. One of ours, our fellow ruling elder, Teresa Harris, served on this committee and can tell you more. Another commissioner, a teaching elder commissioner from our presbytery, Gusti Newquist, she's up from Shenandoah in West Virginia, without hesitation shared her own experience of having to leave the state of West Virginia and step into Maryland for the sake of her life and health. She told the plenary any criminalization of abortion is a threat to religious liberty and an affront to our moral agency as women. The assembly concurred, 348 to 38. As you know, I have close and powerful reasons, family close, to abhor racism and queerphobia. So I was very happy to be placed on the Race and Gender Justice Committee. I had high hopes. The 3 days of meetings were at times tedious, especially when protocol translated to slow-moving obedience to Robert's Rules of Order. The long and decorous pauses were interrupted by emotionally challenging first-hand narratives about the physical and emotional brutality visited upon black people and indigenous people, Latinx Muslims, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, whether straight or LGBTQIA+. The plight of transgender persons of color is particularly violent. In all, we worked through 75 single-spaced pages of resolutions and sent 11 forward for approval. Eventually, 9 went through unremarked in the consent agenda. Those discussed in plenary were discussed because of their strength of vision, for shedding the old excuses, for the need to be read out loud. All in all, daunting subject matter, yet for me, too much like work and too little like church. I listened, I voted, I was civil. I hoped. I wanted fresh energy and new words to open eyes and hearts to overcome indifference. And in the end, I was disappointed and discouraged. If hope was a muscle, mine was badly sprained. Even so, I was gifted with a thought. Anti-racism is a form of worship, a wonderfully worded way to express a truth we want to live into. But still, I wanted a new language. Straight from the red letters of the New Testament, please. Matthew 25 above all. I kept drifting to the wrong lines in Matthew, identifying with the obdurate goats. As you know, things don't work out well for the goats. And then we finished up on Saturday afternoon, fairly late, and Sunday morning I stayed in town to go to church, as I did back in the days when once a year I would go to Louisville for a week, scoring for advanced placement exams. One of my grading buddies, a Catholic friend, and I would go to the Cathedral of the Assumption, which is about 4 blocks from the convention center, 5 blocks from the Yum Center, and a mere 6 from where the PCUSA has its digs at 100 Witherspoon. It was big and airy with candles, columns, colored glass, good chairs with kneelers, a cantor, and oh yes, an enormous organ. I mean, we're talking Phantom of the Opera volume, right? The church also has very good air conditioning, which on the 26th of June in Kentucky is very nice. True, I don't feel that I entirely belong there. There's a very strong streak of the Knox diaspora Calvinist in me. Yet in my friendlier moments, I enjoy the smelly smoke from the censers, the green robes with the gold braid that ironically signify ordinary time, but in a very extraordinary way. If someone wants to kiss a table or carry a silver book over their heads, that's nothing on which I need to have an opinion. Yet I do want to know that I belong. A friendly announcement in the bulletin actually welcomes the stranger, and in so many words says to the clueless, relax, you may not understand what we're doing, but as long as your heart is open, you can do nothing wrong and you are welcome. Words I take to heart. Things like we're all high church. They were mysterious, they were beautiful, they were different, until the homily The Reverend Father Joseph Gaffis, he was ordained in 1971, according to the Google, and is now retired, was standing in for the usual fellow. Father Gaffis began, "The divisions in our country and in our church seem to be widening, especially this week as our Supreme Court made some controversial decisions on firearms rights and abortion." Oh, gulp. I am biased. I clutched. I told myself, Mark, sit still, be nice, wait it out. Gaffis spoke about Pope Francis, St. Francis, why Pope Francis picked the name Francis as the first ever Francis in the papacy. Why it came down to the commandment God gave to the spoiled rich kid from Assisi. Rebuild my church. Rebuild it as Christ would want it. And that meant, Gaffis said, I'll quote him here, "If you want to be Christ's disciple, don't look backward. Keep plowing forward despite the craziness." I think that's good advice for us today, especially post the Roe v. Wade decision. And again I clutched. And then he said, "Pro-life is about both the preborn and the postborn. All life. We need to listen to the pain of others. We need to expand our notion of the ethic of life, including eliminating the death penalty, eliminating poverty, supporting child care and health care, to be more inclusive of migrants and others in our society. How can we lift up our brothers and sisters? That's being Catholic and Christian. We are freed by God's Spirit to seek new paths." And he headed back towards his chair. There was a pause, and then one person, not me, one person began to clap. Really, in Mass. And then the many did. During communion, I even went up for a blessing. I did this stuff, don't worry. As I went out in the heat and I headed towards my car, I recognized that I just heard the underlying message of the 225th General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church. Suddenly, the hope muscle had some flex. When you're tired, I'm going to wind up with this very, for me, important story. When you're tired and the sun is bright and it's Sunday afternoon in eastern Kentucky, some of the drivers poke along, their cars kind of rocking and wandering from lane to lane as they're singing their favorite hymns, while others, at very high speed in enormous pickup trucks, are weaving among them, and that can be kind of unnerving. And let's just add, especially if you haven't been sleeping well for 4 days. And, as a result, a headache is a natural consequence of that accumulation of facts. So about midway between Charleston and Beckley, West Virginia, on Interstate 64, there's a rest area. I was holding on for it because I mistakenly thought it had a Starbucks, a Stop and Shop, and clean restrooms. I was wrong on all counts, right? It's a short off-ramp to a cramped parking lot, and a pair of grubby, very smelly bathrooms. It was late on a hot afternoon. And in the small lobby, there were vending machines, plenty of candy bars, no doubt melting in their wrappers, sodas, and teeny little bags of chips, but no water and no Tylenol. Then I saw a door. Yes, I went through the door. The door said, snack bar. Well, sort of. You could get a hot dog microwaved there, or get a bigger bag of cheese puffs. And indeed, there was an open case that had bottles of water in it. I carried one over to the counter, and I took out a 20 to buy a $1.29 bottle of water. The young woman on the other side took the money and asked, "Is there anything else you need?" I said, "Well, I was hoping to buy some Tylenol." There were none of that was in sight, right? I was hoping to buy some Tylenol. She says, "I have some." She was making the change. "It's in my purse." Just like that. No hesitation. I said, "You don't need to bother." She said, "Hang on, I will go get it. My purse is in the storeroom." And she turned and went back. Meantime, I was putting my money away, and the thought crossed my mind, this is quite a headache. This is at least a $10 headache. a headache about as big as annual per capita contribution to the national church. But giving her the money would be awkward, wouldn't it? Yeah. There I'd be slopping about with my middle-class privilege, giving the easy gift, strutting my generosity. So I put the money away. She was back and said, "Hold out your hand," and she shook a few into my palm. I tried to nudge the extra back, and she says, "No, keep them for the road." And then without reflection, I did something I have never done before. I asked her, "What is your name?" She seemed momentarily surprised. "Amanda," she said. "Amanda, you are in my prayers tonight." She straightened, she touched her throat, and tears came to her eyes. You have no idea what that means to me. Actually, I think I do. For no sooner did she see me than I saw her. Two very simple gestures, as ordinary and secular as the room we were in, and sacred as two strangers acknowledged the holy, complete being of each other. In other words, that was one despair-quenching bottle of water I got at the snack bar at milepost 69 rest area on the West Virginia Turnpike. The point, it's a structure as apt to be visited by the Holy Spirit as the Cathedral of the Assumption or this room, this very special room. I was thirsty and you. It's finally quite simple. So let me finish with a return to the words of the prophet Isaiah. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Thank you. Our hymn of response is There is a Balm in Gilead.